At the outset, most governors suspended their state sunshine laws under emergency authorizations. Because the pandemic has not ended, some of those remain in effect even now. The consequences of that have been felt far and wide, and not just among the press or open government groups like the ones that NFOIC represents, but also members of the general public. Virtual public meetings allowed more people to watch because they could access those from their laptops wherever they might be. But this also raised real questions about the quality of that access. Some bodies muted the audience so there could be no verbal questions, or they required submitted questions and then screened those questions, or they mangled the questions, or they did not allow follow-up questions. Remote meetings also prevented reporters from being able to directly ask questions in person of elected officials. Courts delayed trials, and when they did hold them, they did so virtually. This raised real questions about the swift and fair administration of justice, but also hampered reporting. There are all kinds of things that take place inside a courtroom, a physical courtroom, and outside that can be newsworthy or very significant to the reporting process. Perhaps the biggest challenge that we've all encountered is access to public records. This was difficult at all levels, federal, state, local, even before the pandemic. But the governor's suspensions of state sunshine laws gave state and local agency officials an ideal excuse to deny and delay some more. To be sure, this is not a partisan issue. Some of the hardest states in which to access records are run by Democrats.
When the pandemic hit, among the countries we were looking at, one of the first casualties was actually the willingness and transparency capacity of governments to proactively disclose information. And we were looking at data across the countries that we're looking at. And it wasn't just countries in the global south, right? You'd expect countries in the global south. So countries like Brazil or South Africa had some of those challenges where once officials were working from home, they couldn't access their systems. They weren't willing to open up meetings. There were strict lockdowns. But this was also equally in the global north. So of course, we've heard about different states in the US, but equally in countries like Canada or in Germany, we had similar challenges, which spoke both to administrative delays and capacity questions. Now, unfortunately, it's not just about some of the technical and capacity challenges. A lot of this was about political will as well. And that's sort of, it clearly
came. Those government shutdowns, we have definitely seen federal agencies suspend processing of records requests under FOIA. A common trend we've seen during shutdowns is agencies say that they will resume FOIA operations when their funding is restored. So we have seen FOIA deemed non-essential at the federal level before. But during this pandemic, right, government employees are still working. It just looks a little bit different. And some agencies are very much still processing FOIA requests and making those releases. So the rogue decisions of some agencies to just totally ignore their obligations under FOIA was really troubling. But there's definitely an upward swing. Just like at the state level, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those suspensions in place. The same thing is true at the federal level.
Start by sharing with you a line from an emergency ordinance that the city of Fresno, California passed on March 19th, 2020. That happened to be the same day that California's governor issued statewide stay-at-home orders. So the Fresno order talks about city services that won't be suspended, including hot meals for seniors, and it notes that utility and sanitation services will not be discontinued for non-payment. And then it has this nugget, quote, non-essential city services may be suspended, including but not limited to responding to requests under the California Public Records Act. So that line caused some howls in our offices, alarm. It speaks generally of non-essential services, but then it only offers one example of that. And that one example is the California Public Records Act. So as Gunita said, a lot of agencies, I think, treat and unfortunately generally treat open records laws as sort of optional or of lesser importance. And it's a big problem. So, we've done what we can to combat this attitude. We promptly issued a statement in conjunction with SPJ chapters in California, reminding all government agencies that transparency is indeed an essential service, and maybe even more so in the context of a pandemic, when the public has an absolute need to know how the government's responding and what it's doing.